1. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, the current political, economic, and social landscape in Africa as a continent and individual nation states is largely complex and diverse and exists on a spectrum. We have strong democracies, successful and failed authoritarian regimes, and even illiberal democracies. That is to say, what we've seen happen over the past 50 years for the continent is the attempt to be able to uplift them and their states out of poverty and ultimately out of developing nation status towards a developed nation and trying to bolster a sense of a middle class for themselves and for the world to see. This has largely failed and has led to systemic abuse and failures economically, like hyperinflation, currency crisis, and market shock and illiquidity that ripple across the stock market, bond market, and real estate that ultimately cripple the middle class and poor individuals who are trying to get out of their day-to-day subsistence. This is because the way that the West and Europe looks at the continent is ultimately through this lens of capitalism, which has failed. Europe and the United States, India and China, essentially having to be forced to pick and choose favorite nations at the expense of poorer nations and people. That is to say, rich nations with a higher GDP who don't need that much more development because they already have a sense of development, like that of Nigeria, South Africa, and Algeria, at the expense of the poorest of the poor nation states with the relatively lowest GDP per capita, the likes of Burundi, South Sudan, Mozambique, and Congo are ultimately exploited, ladies and gentlemen, and we see that with the mining and oil gas industries that ultimately create blood industries off the back of the laborers who often come from these very disenfranchised minority states and poorest individuals. We say enough is enough. We need to change our model in terms of being able to uplift the continent and these individual states out of poverty and oppression. A few features of our model. Number one, this is an actor motion of what the African government should do, and there are two ways at looking at this. The African Union and continent as a collective, and these individual nation states. And we say we are going to push for socialist reform in terms of the following ways. What do we mean by push? A, we are going to do this through soft ways, like being able to influence and vote socialist parties and leaders in order to be able to transition towards more state-controlled authoritarianism in terms of effective centralization and state monopoly. B, we're willing to defend the high burden of doing this through hard ways, which is an eventual transitionary shift towards full-on socialism, wherein we're going to follow suit like that of Xi with the CCP and what Lee Kuan Yew did with Singapore decades ago. What we're going to do is we are going to create the ASP, or the African Socialist Party, in order to be able to prop up a socialist party to be able to do this. We are going to select the most successful and rich individual from a democratic state, and that person is going to be able to be the supreme leader and overlord. Perhaps someone from South Africa, they seem to be doing a relatively good job at that. Second thing is that how are we going to be able to mech out socialism? What are the features of that? I'll take the POI in a bit. A, we're talking about a gradual shift towards a collective state-owned enterprise of key industries like health, education, and the creation of public works in order to be able to take back the control from the West and from Europe, who use the euros, pounds, and dollars as a means to be able to pillage the continent in order to be able to genuflect to what these large multinational corporations want in order to be able to have a sense of autonomy. B, being able to, of course, still have a free market to an extent, but the state and the ASP is going to be able to control and own this from the top down for the continent and for these individual countries. I'll take a POI from whoever raised it earlier. Go for it.
Yeah, so this from closing government.
Go.
Can't choose this idea of a free market coexisting with your side. Your side is socialist, means there's a total government backing and control of that particular economy. You need to defend on all instances how that...
Bro, take a look at fucking China, right? China is the key epitome of socialism, but they still have capitalism and a free market, meaning you can still have free foreign flows in capitalism, but a lot of these features are largely state-controlled as an enterprise. We think we can still have some features of capitalism, like the stock market and owning particular things, but key things are going to be controlled by the state. Look at China. I am going to answer a question of why this is likely to be done in a good way as opposed to the slew of material you get coming from proposition. A, being able to take a look at the optics of the nation as an African continent as something that is actually trying something new. Because we've tried capitalism and it ultimately led to that wealth disparity that I mentioned in my pre-oration. B, we actually push nation states to have a sense of accountability in order to be able to take a look at who those good leaders are and how those people are likely to lead to better reform. Ladies and gentlemen, we think that this is likely to be done in a transitionary period. Of course, there are going to be birth pains just like anything, but the long-term outcome and economic development is going to be better for those particular people. This is going to affect strong democracies, authoritarian states, and illiberal democracies because now these juntas and warlords are now having to be subject to a supreme leader who is likely able to get their act together. And even in instances on both sides where some countries are just kind of fucked because it's past saving, at least we know that those particular people of which become the distributor of capital, opportunity, and the purveyor of the ones creating things like healthcare, infrastructure, and education are going to be the people we actually can hold responsible. And for all of these reasons, we are very proud to open this debate and stand on side negative. Thank you.